When it comes to making divisive sequels, I'd argue that few do it better than Monolith Productions. No better example of this is with Blood 2, Fear 2, and case in point Condemned 2 Bloodshot.
Sounds like I missed something.
Condemned 2 is just one of those games that I just can't stop myself from coming back to. I feel like every time I go back and give it another chance, I find something else about it that wins me over even more. I did a video on this one a while back and I didn't give it the most positive coverage, but I also did another video on Fear 2 recently, which has also motivated me to go back and give this thing yet another try.
You're looking more beat up every time I see you.
And I don't know, man, maybe it's the fact that I know what's coming this time, but I actually found myself enjoying it a fair bit this time.
I'm getting to that.
Guess my point is buckle up and empty your bladders because we're gonna give this thing one more look.
Is everything okay in there?
Yeah, just do it.
Right, so Condemned 2 takes place 11 months after the first game, where our returning champion Ethan Thomas, understandably unhinged from the stuff he went through in the first game, now seeks solace at the bottom of a liquor bottle. Basically, the gist of it was that Ethan got framed for murder, and in his quest to bring the real killer to justice, somehow uncovered a secret society that's trying to control mankind by sticking metal rods into their faces. No, seriously. Working with a family friend named Malcolm Van Horn and his murder son Leyland, who turned out to be the killer responsible for the whole thing. And yeah, fair enough, I mean, having to deal with that shit would put anyone on edge. As a result, that clean-cut professional agent we knew in the first game is replaced by an edgy, unwashed hobo, who keeps his fists wrapped up and wears a t-shirt with a bullseye on it. Honestly, I don't think they could have made him any edgier if they tried.
What now?
It's also kind of reflected a lot in the cinematics and sequences throughout the game where Ethan often has these kind of psychotic episodes, often agitated by his alcohol abuse.
I said shut up!
He even interacts with his own personal demon directly, which is like a bald version of himself that taunts him throughout the game. So let's just say Ethan's not the kind of guy you'd lend your car to for the weekend or ask to babysit your kids.
Oh shit! You're a drunk and a liability. Here, take a moment to get familiar with your weapon.
Yeah, you're a liability, but hey, take this fully loaded shotgun, bro.
I said shut up!
We're introduced to him in a bar where he pretty much beats someone to near death, and as a result of this is only kicked out by the owner. I don't know, man, generally when you bash someone to the point that their hands are covered in your blood, the authorities usually get involved.
I've seen the unspeakable.
Anyway, after playing through this first level, you're then also reunited with Rosa, returning from the first game, who it seems has somehow managed to age in reverse.
I'm getting to that.
Along with a new character named Agent Orland, and they inform Ethan that his mate Malcolm has been murdered and they'd like his help to investigate.
Report to SCU in 1 hour.
That plot point though is about the most sane thing you're going to see in Condemned 2, because it doesn't take too long before this just goes off the goddamn rails.
LaRue here, ready to give this shithole a animal.
Because for the last third or so of this game, it's like you're having an out-of-body experience or some kind of fever dream. Let's just say that heads are going to explode, and I mean that literally. This was around the same time that Monolith worked on Fear 2, and it definitely marks that key period for the studio where they just produced some of their edgiest content, and Condemned 2 is a perfect example of that. But it was also kind of reflective on the industry as a whole.
Oh shit!
Manhunt 2, for instance, had come out a year prior, and this is just the height of when video games had their edge factors dialed up to 11. With characters using profanities, lots of graphic violence, and these dark and gritty storylines. So basically 2021 in video game form.
Let me finish.
Now the premise of being stuck in this situation and having to fight back against all of these miscreants sure is a scary one. But then again, so is having your credit card stolen, but thankfully that's something you won't have to worry about with Ekster's smart wallets. Remember that episode of Seinfeld where George walks around with a wallet the size of a goddamn football? Yeah, well, don't be George. Ekster's wallets are super easy to use and also convenient. You can keep all of your cards in one place and get easy access to them at any time. You've also got RFID protection, which stops people from being able to access the chips in your cards as well. Not to mention, they also come equipped with trackers in case you do what I do, which is to leave the thing around the house somewhere and can't find it. It's even solar powered and features voice activation. It's really like the Swiss Army knife of wallets. Plus, they're made out of premium leather, which makes them look classy as shit. Up until June 20th, these guys are having a Father's Day sale too, which means you can get 25% off their entire site, which, look, that's a pretty hard deal to ignore. I've been using mine for a couple of months now, and I've never looked back, so head on over to the site today to pick yours up. Right, now with Condemned 2, it definitely does have a rocky story, but if nothing else, things do start off pretty well.
Piss off.
There's definitely a cool atmosphere to this whole first introductory level where you and some poor guy are just trying to get out of the cold weather and warm up with a couple of drinks. And as someone who's no stranger to the comforting effects of alcohol, let me tell you, I can relate.
Shut up.
But then before you know it, you're beating up a bunch of junkies with your bare fists. This is actually one of the new features in Condemned 2, because unlike the first game, you don't always need to have a weapon in your hands to defend yourself. Now, if nothing else is available, you can pull up Ethan's dukes and let these scumbags have it. Works upon that simple but effective combat system from the first game, in that if you're not attacking, you're blocking or parrying, hopefully to stun enemies and then set them up for a counterattack. The thing is though, your fists are kinda weak as shit when compared to more traditional bludgeoning instruments like pipes and planks of wood. And you'll see pretty quickly just how ineffective this is. I mean, the amount of damage it takes to put enemies down with punches is just absurd. Despite the fact you're punching them so much that their face should be turned into a goddamn mashed potato. The fists also have less range and a shorter parry window than practically every single other weapon in the game. And I mean, look, I get it. They're your fists, they're not fucking Excalibur. But even if you've unlocked the damage upgrades, it's still such a really ineffective way of settling your differences with all of these enemies. And this does kind of lead me into how I feel about the combat system in this sequel. I mean, mechanically, the combat's definitely been updated, but I don't know if I'd say that it's been upgraded, simply because I just don't think adding features and mechanics automatically makes something better. There was a definite simplicity to the combat in the first game. It really just involved either hitting someone or parrying. But then the randomness of enemy attack patterns made the combat feel deep and always challenging. Enemies would often feign attacks, they'd have faster or slower attacks depending on what weapon they had. And likewise for Ethan, your attacks would also differ greatly depending on what kind of weapon you had. It was just a simple but a visceral system that really emphasized the crushing nature of the combat. Not to mention, it just really captured that feeling of beating the living shit out of someone with a blunt object.
Break yourself!
There's definitely a lot more creative weapons this time around though, and I still find it highly amusing how you can beat someone to death with a gumball machine.
Come again?
Even if that is about the most impractical weapon I think I've ever seen in a video game. One of the objective improvements, I think, is that you can now sprint, so Ethan doesn't just meander around the entire time like his shoes are made of concrete. Sprinting and then attacking also gives you this really useful shove attack. So it works twice in the way that it improves your mobility, but it also has a function during combat. It's what's referred to as a win-win.
What now?
They've even tried to implement combos, which don't always seem to work that well, only because Ethan attacks so slowly that you can barely get a basic 1-2 combo off without taking a hit in between from an enemy. Charge up that little rage meter in the corner of the screen, and you can even perform these button prompt attacks that's going to take out most enemies in a single hit. And just like the first game, you can even execute enemies once they're weak enough, this time even picking them up and using some kind of element in the environment, which is, you know, awesome. Ethan's also got his taser again, which, depending on how much it's upgraded, can have up to 5 charges. But considering most enemies kind of drop like a bag of dirt in a single charge, this thing honestly just feels like cheating. Then again, sometimes you just gotta taser a bitch. The guns also make a return as well, but these really are the worst parts of the game, and there's almost entire levels here where you're forced into shooting things, and it just kind of feels out of place in a series that's always focused primarily on melee combat first and foremost. Also considering very little's been done to improve how it functions since the first game. I guess too, to kind of simulate Ethan's borderline jaundice and liver failure, his hands wobble all over the place when you're trying to aim down the sights. Probably a side effect of using hard liquor as mouthwash for the past 11 months. This guy doesn't just look like he smells like alcohol, he looks like he's been marinated in it.
Back off.
So yeah, being forced into using an assault rifle against a couple of dozen mercenaries ain't the kind of thing you really want. And it's kind of an instance where I really do think I'd be a better shot in real life than Ethan is in this game.
Back off.
So look, I guess my point is that whether or not you think all of this is an upgrade just kind of depends on personal preference. I think it is a combat system with more features, but I still do prefer the basic mechanics of the first game. And just because there's more of something doesn't always make it better. It's like saying that pizza with 6 toppings is automatically going to be better than pizza with 3 toppings. And it really is, I think, one of those games where for everything that it does well, it does something equally stupid. So let's talk about the campaign then, shall we? The first level, for instance, despite having a really cool atmosphere, then introduces one of the worst enemies in the entire game, which are these weird little tar monster guys that you fight in these dingy, garbage-covered environments as they materialize out of the goddamn walls. And look, here's just some basic enemy design 101, right? If the texture of an enemy is almost the same texture you're using for the environment, along with it also being near pitch black, well, then that doesn't make for optimal visual clarity, does it? Fuck. I just can't emphasize how much I hate these things, and in a game centered around melee combat and all about timing your parries and blocks, enemies like this just kinda ruin everything that combat is going for. The end of this first level has you moving through like a hospital or something where the entire area is running amok with these things, combined with these ball sacks on the ceiling that split open and attack you when you come too close. The next few levels are kinda decent though, and feel like they could have been taken right out of the first game. Now you're moving through an old abandoned hotel looking for the whereabouts of Malcolm. You've got junkies hiding in the shadows, there's a huge roided up guy that smashes through walls, and one of the side objectives is to find and destroy a bunch of meth labs. Yeah, junkies, roid munchers, and meth. Sounds like a night spent at your mum's house. This level also introduces one of the new mechanics where Rose is going to ask you a bunch of questions about your current assignment. Then you got to use common sense and situational awareness to answer correctly.
Okay, it's coming through now.
And answering all of this stuff properly along with finding a bunch of side content ends up netting you some pretty useful upgrades at the end of each level, like giving you an extra health bar or a shiny pair of knuckle dusters for your fists.
Alright, let's move on.
Not to mention, this whole mechanic of analysing crime scenes and using all of your tools is classic Condemned gameplay. I mean, we kind of forget that before Ethan turned into the edgiest man alive, he was a pretty damn talented field agent. And yeah, look, I know that UV light gadget is probably just a really simple visual effect, but I still think it looks awesome. This kind of stuff is just cool to me, and the kind of stuff that makes Condemned so much fun to play. There's even a mirror scare that they've worked in too, which is classic mid-2000s game design. And I mean, if the whole game just had been about moving around these kind of environments, getting into fist fights with these various disfigured dregs, well, I'd have been cool with it. The fourth level, you're in a doll factory, and this whole level is really cool on paper. It's got a great atmosphere, but it's kind of ruined by two things. Firstly, these really annoying guys that run around on fire that can wipe out your entire health bar in seconds. The safest way to deal with these guys is to throw your weapon at them, which is going to kill them in a single hit. But if you don't have a weapon on you at the time, well, then sucks to be you, bitch. Then you've got these stupid exploding dolls, which just makes no sense to me. I mean, did the vagrants that live here make these sentient dolls or something that are programmed to chase people down and detonate at the sight of intruders? Or are they supposed to be actual small people? And if so, why are they kept in these small crates around the factory? For the second half of this level, you've even got to wear a mask so you don't die from smoke inhalation, as well as making sure you leave at least a 1.5 meter gap from every other person. But it also makes it look like you're viewing the world through someone's butthole, which makes visibility even tougher. This level does at least have a cool boss fight though. It's against some psycho bitch who's dressed up like a doll, and I've been to enough video game conventions to know that anyone dressed like that is worth steering clear of. The level that follows after this back at the SCU base though is the worst thing in the game. Remember before how I said that every time this game does something right, it also does something wrong? Well, this is case in point right here. For starters, this whole level is just a hallucination that Ethan's going through while he's getting a brain scan. And I've always hated how if you die during hallucination sequences in video games, that you still have to go back and replay them. I mean, wouldn't it make more sense to just wake up? But secondly, I think I'm gonna need an actual brain scan myself after playing this level because the amount of obnoxious visual effects they use here actually gave me brain damage. There's a lot of moments in this game outside of this level too where they use these kind of abrasive screen filters, and all it really does is just handicap you because it makes it way more harder to see what the hell is happening. It's like having someone running sandpaper across your eyeball. And throughout almost this entire level, you've got to put up with all of these distortion effects. There's loud, scratchy noises and these eye-blurring filters. It is an absolute clusterfuck for the senses. And I'm not kidding when I say that playing through this made me feel sick. And not the good kind of sick either, where I got back into skateboarding, got some tattoos and started listening to Linkin Park again. But then thirdly, on top of that, this section also brings back those annoying tar monsters, which again are just an absolute pain in the sphincter. Thankfully, the museum level after this though is the level where they pretty much get the whole thing spot on. The entire objective of this level is that you're investigating the city museum for clues about the murder of the mayor, whose decapitated corpse was found by the police.
How'd you make an ID?
Yeah, she's only gone and misplaced her entire head. What a silly goose. So Ethan snaps into action and his investigative instincts kick in, with the clues leading him straight to the museum. It's a pretty creepy setup going into this place at nighttime. Not to mention, it actually has a purpose and a goal within the story itself. You're not just entering this spooky area for the sake of entering a spooky area. You sneak into this place avoiding the security guards too, as you're not even officially supposed to be there, and you're not meant to actually kill these guys. Which also puts a nice twist, I think, on the gameplay loop, considering every other person you've come across has just been a crackhead begging to be put out of their misery. Fear not though, because halfway through all of this, a bunch of vagrants break in and start to put all of that medieval armor and weaponry to good use. Now this is a terrifying concept, that these psychos would break into a museum, put on old medieval armor, and then go around murdering people with broadswords, axes, and warhammers. And something about this whole level has always unnerved me. Like this bit here, man, watching these guys team up on that poor security guard, it's like watching a pack of hyena hunting down a lone gazelle. The final boss for this level is kind of the ringleader, I guess, a huge guy in a massive suit of armor with a giant axe who can only be attacked from behind. And Ethan even finishes him off by removing his entire head from his body. Yeah, better to be safe, I guess. What follows after this isn't just the best horror chase sequence in this game, it's the best horror chase sequence in any game. Forget Call of Cthulhu or the chainsaw chase in Evil Within, this right here is where it's at. I think whether or not you've played this game or not, if you know that Condemned 2 exists, you've pretty much heard people talking about the bear chase. Two words which you don't ever really want to hear back to back, bear and chase. Anyway, at this point in the story, you're at the infamous Black Lodge looking for some more information about Malcolm and Serial Killer X. But the lodge happens to be ground zero for a rabid grizzly bear attack. And again, not two things that you want paired together. Rabies and grizzly bears. In fact, rabies with anything generally isn't good news. The setup for this is just perfect. You move through these eerily quiet canyons, hearing that bear roaring off in the distance. Then you get to this abandoned lodge, passing the bloody remains of the unfortunate souls that came up against this thing, seeing their body parts and internal organs decorating every surface. And then pretty much without warning, this thing just comes out of nowhere and starts chasing you.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Also teaching me that bears can use stairs. That rhymes.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
And if it catches up to Ethan, that horrible image of it salivating all over him before it tucks in and rips him to pieces is really the stuff of nightmares, man. I hope this little sequence hasn't turned you off bears though, because those things are still about the cutest looking motherfuckers on the planet, even if they do have the eyes of a stone cold killer. Sadly though, from this point on is where the game just kinda shits the bed, but it doesn't ever recover. Because right after this whole chase sequence, you're then having to go through the rest of the lodge, finding 6 hidden explosives, along with getting into gunfights with all of these various soldiers. You're now having to meticulously track these individual wires throughout this maze of a hunting lodge 6 times, then throw the same looking explosive charges out of nearby windows before they detonate. After this, there's a bit of deja vu in another school area shortly after this that gave me some serious flashbacks to the first game, and I gotta say that some of the imagery here is horrifying.
The fuck is that?
It even ends with an actual bum fight, with you locked into this electrified cage taking on a bunch of hobos. But it also somehow manages to introduce even more annoying enemies. This time it's these scurrying assholes that run around and attack you super quickly and randomly. These guys were called rejects in the first game, and maybe someone at Monolith Productions should have taken that title literally and rejected them from the game entirely. And what is it with Monolith Productions and putting these kind of enemies into their games? Now, I'm not going to outright spoil the ending, but I will repeat again how I've always said that Condemned 2 to me really is like the Highlander 2 of video game sequels. And if that comparison makes sense, well, then you know what you're in for. And that's a one-way ticket on the express train into batshit crazy town. Basically, to sum it up if you're not familiar with it, you've got the first Highlander movie, which had this really mysterious and cool story about all of these immortal warriors who were locked into this battle that spanned over centuries. To kill an immortal, you had to cut their head off, which ended with the victor busting a fat nut, along with living on to fight another day. Once there was only one left, that person won the prize. It was a simple movie with a simple premise, and that's all it ever needed to be. In Highlander 2 though, instead of just leaving the mystique about how all of this works, they instead went right into every single little detail and tried to explain it. And it turns out that all of these immortals are actually aliens that traveled to Earth or something. And it's always kind of epitomized to me, the whole phrase of how less is more. And again, it's kind of similar to the direction that the story takes in Condemned 2. Where it turns out that Ethan is now some kind of super powerful prophetic figure. He's basically Hobo Jesus, the chosen one and all of that shit.
Enough! I don't want to hear it.
Or because he's got some kind of unique bone structure or something, and not the kind of bone structure I gave your mum last night either.
Shut up.
The first game's climax had you fighting deformed freaks in a farmhouse with planks of wood, and the final boss was a skinny guy with a metal stick. The second game has you fighting guys in Iron Man's Mark 1 armor, before trying to avoid having your head explode as you fight the members of this super powerful and all-knowing mind-controlling society at their secret headquarters on Garbage Island, and that is not an exaggeration of the facts.
Enough! I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, and I almost forgot that level against the Magician. Yeah, there's this weird, almost out of place level before the final chapter, where you move through some kind of vaudeville-style theater, fighting the fishnet-clad assistants of some omniscient magician.
What?
With recent games like Resident Evil Village and some of the outlandish stuff we got in some of the last couple of sections of that game, Condemned 2 does seem pretty grounded in comparison. But it's always just been a really odd juxtaposed ending that kinda sticks out to me in a game which doesn't ever really seem to know if it wants to take itself seriously.
What?
Such is also the curse for a lot of the other Monolith games. This thing's just kinda been sitting in copyright limbo for years. Like Alien vs Predator 2 and No One Lives Forever, we've been robbed of remasters and remakes for over a decade now. And sadly too, Condemned 2 never got ported to the PC, and I've always thought it would have greatly benefited from that. Someday we might have all of these games in one neat little package, but for now it retains its status as this obscure, almost forgotten about sequel to one of the best first-person melee combat games of all time. And as society grows closer and closer to a total collapse, it might be fun to play this thing before it turns into an actual simulation of daily life.